let's move on to this, shall we? Well, just recently, Big Papa Iger, Bob Iger, has, of course, again stepped down as CEO of Disney after serving twice and bringing Disney to being the most powerful entertainment company in the world. Now, because he's no longer there, he's felt, let's say, a little loose-lipped and being open to talk about some things that he has not ever talked about before when it comes to stuff they did at Disney and things like that, including a couple things that this is from an article in Variety where it says Bob Iger talked about that they took a shot at buying the James Bond franchise. They almost bought Twitter, and they were in talks to merge with Apple. They were in talks to merge with Apple. All three of these things to me are fascinating, like absolutely fascinating. Now, should be pointed out that the James Gunn or the James Bond part of this was back when they, Bob Iger explains, was back when they were acquiring Star Wars. They just got Pixar a while before that. He said, I was in the frame of mind of let's just go get everything we want. And apparently they did take a shot at James Bond, which now, of course, belongs to Amazon. And they did not get it. And you know what? I think Disney's had an incredible track record of success. I'm kind of glad they didn't get James Bond. I can't see James Bond as under the Disney umbrella. But then again, I could never really see Deadpool under the Disney umbrella either. And that sort of worked out. So the James Bond thing was there. The Twitter thing was there. And they weren't going to use it as a social media network. They thought about buying it, Bob Iger says, and they were going to use it like a global distribution platform. So it would have totally fundamentally changed the nature of what Twitter was. Would still probably be better than what it is today, but still it was going to completely fundamentally change it. But Bob Iger said, we ultimately decided against it because we just thought it would be too distracting. We just thought it would just be a big distraction to everything else we were doing at Disney. So ultimately they moved away from that. But by far, to me, the most interesting and fascinating thing about it was something that I talked about for a while, although I never had any proof, which was Bob Iger says that they and reps at Apple actually did engage in conversations about the possibility of merging the companies. Now, for a long time, big executives in both companies have sat on the board of the other's companies at different times. Like that's been the case for a long time. And I always thought that if anybody was going to buy Disney, I always thought it would be Apple for two reasons. One, Apple is one of the few companies on the planet that could actually open up the wallet and have the money to buy Disney. Not many people do. So that was one reason. But the second reason is just because they have such similar corporate cultures and the synergy would have been right. Because guys, what I've said for a long time is, look, Apple clearly wants to get into the entertainment vertical, right? And one of the things Apple has always done when they've wanted to get into a space is you have two options. You from the ground level up, try to build and develop your own thing, or go and buy somebody who's already in it and get us 5 steps ahead. And I always thought that if Apple really wanted to get into entertainment, the best thing they could possibly do is buy a company that's already firmly established in the vertical and integrated into what they're doing. Now, Rob, whenever we've had that discussion, you've always rightly pointed out, yeah, but does Apple want to be in the theme park business? And I think you've been absolutely right in pointing that out. I still thought there was a way to work that out. But fortunately today, we have what I consider to be one of the world's foremost Apple experts here on the panel, Brian. So, Brian, you saw this. We can talk about the James Bond stuff. We can talk about the Twitter stuff. But the part I'm fascinated most about is Apple. How would you see this making sense? And what do you think ultimately were the not sense-making things that ultimately made it go nowhere? How do you see this?
Well, we have to kind of look back at how Pixar was first formed. So people may not remember, but Steve Jobs actually purchased the computer division from Lucasfilm, okay? So he owned Pixar. I think it was for somewhere around like $10 million. Now, later on, Disney swoops in and acquires Pixar. Remember, Disney Animation was struggling. I can't remember this off top of my head. Maybe you guys know better, but I feel like the last few movies where Disney animation was kind of coming down, there was Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think Hercules might have been coming out at that time, and it just felt a little more stale in general after you had those bangers like Aladdin, Little Mermaid, and Beauty and the Beast and Pocahontas. So Disney Animation then ended up purchasing Pixar for $7+ billion. Okay. So Steve Jobs becomes like this huge, owns, I think, a majority, the largest stakeholder in Disney at the time. That's just a little history of how first of all, this relationship is very deeply intertwined. The other thing, though, that I see is I believe in the article, Bob Iger talked about how they had talked to Apple somewhere around in 2019. Now, Steve Jobs passed in 2011, and I think also the second version of Bob Iger is very different than the first version of Bob Iger that we saw lead Disney. He tended to be a little more about the creative, really into, the development. And then when he came back, it was more like bottom line balance sheets. Yes, he is still Bob Iger, but he was a different person in version 2. And I think version 2 of Bob Iger would have clashed with Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs is about, the creativity. He's about the art. He's about, the craftsmanship. And I think maybe those philosophies might have been different at the time. You talk about it. We had heard stories for, I feel like, at least 5 to 10 years of Apple and Disney doing some sort of a deal. We never heard anything like this until now, of course, way later. But, I think that Steve Jobs clearly saw how important content was. We saw how they disrupted content with iTunes and the music business. It then caused media companies to see what happened there, shrink back, kind of opening the kimono and letting Apple essentially control how they distribute their media. And now that's why we see all these different platforms, Disney Plus, HBO Max. But so they were a little wiser at the time. But the Disney Bob Iger first version, and the Steve Jobs, and if you say, let's say around 2010, maybe that probably would have happened at that point in time if they actually talked, just because of the meetings of the minds and the places that these two men were at. The current Apple under Tim Cook, Tim Cook did a lot of great things, the most valuable tech company because of his efforts. His mind is more about supply chain, not about content. He had other people deal with content, and that relationship was not there with Bob Iger. So yeah, I say back in the day, it could have actually happened if they sat down, but 2019, it wasn't going to happen.
Rob, I mean, obviously you and I have talked about a potential Apple Disney merger, the whole thing. So I'm curious to know what you think that could have looked like. But I'm most interested in knowing what you think about the idea of Bob Iger saying, yeah, I took a shot at buying James Bond. Could you see James 007 in the Mouse House? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, not really. I mean, people forget that the James Bond franchise, up until the purchase by Amazon, was a family business. I mean, it was Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were the two producers who produced that franchise. Harry Saltzman left, but it was Albert Broccoli's family. Of course, his daughter Barbara Broccoli took over, and and Barbara Broccoli's stepbrother Michael Wilson kept the family legacy going. They produced 25 James Bond movies beginning in 1962. And so it really was a family business. And having a family business acquired by a bigger corporation, I mean, let's face it, after all that time, I think the Broccoli's were kind of done. After they killed James Bond, it's time to say bye. But I think that any major franchise like the Bond franchise would suffer the same fate as Star Wars, because they're not buying it because they have Bond stories to tell. They're buying it because the James Bond franchise has made money over the last 50 years, 60 years. And the problem with franchises is if you buy them, they're only as good as the people that are working within them. And if you don't have a plan and you don't know what you're going to do with that franchise, it's not exactly, I've never understood why acquire something if you don't. I would figure that you would have an entire plan laid out before the purchase goes through, because you're buying an asset that I would assume how you're going to exploit. But Disney didn't really have much of a plan with Star Wars, clearly, and I don't think they would have had much of a They would have been like, we're going to make a young James Bond movie, and we're going to do animated stuff, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. But yeah, who's going to do those things? Like, who do you have? Amazon basically acquired Bond and said, yep, Denis Villeneuve is going to make our first Bond movie. That's how it's done. But Apple didn't do that. So, Disney didn't do that about the Bond franchise. Sorry. So I don't think Bond would have fared well under the Mouse House. And what would they have done with
to be fair, it wasn't until some time long after they did acquire James Bond that they then connected Denis Villeneuve to it. I mean, so that was something they did after the fact.
Sure, but I bet they had plans. It didn't happen that long. I mean, it wasn't. They announced that pretty quickly that he was going to take over that, and I think that they knew. I think Amazon kind of knew, because you take over a franchise like that, you've got to. They paid a lot of money for the Bond franchise, and I think they knew. They probably had a list of 5 directors. They wanted to attach a director as quickly as they could, and they did. I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think that Bond would have fared well. It would have been diluted, and what would like Disney they haven't even remastered the Planet of the Apes movies yet. They've owned Fox since 2019. Now
nobody cares that they haven't remastered Planet of the Apes yet. No, I've not had one person write into my show to say, John, when are they going to remaster Planet of the Apes? I've never got that email.
The point is, as an asset, if you're going to make more James Bond movies, Disney is making, Fox made Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And where are the original Apes films? I mean, you have a whole franchise there. There's 25 previous Bond movies. Would they have gone back and remastered them all and put them on their, because I would assume, isn't that what you're buying?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what Amazon does with that whole thing once they get further into it. But guys, right now, the question is for you. What do you think about this interview with Bob Iger? Dropping some bombs, actually, like they almost bought James Bond. They almost bought Twitter. We didn't even go much into that. And they were in talks with Apple about maybe merging in with Apple. Kind of crazy stuff. Like, for every one thing that happens, it seems like there's 10 things even crazier that didn't. Whatever you guys think about it, jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. Guys, we want to take a second and thank a sponsor of today's video, Hims. You know, one of the hardest things about trying to lose weight is just figuring out what actually works. Because we've seen them all. There are a million trends, diets, and gimmicks out there, and honestly, it can get overwhelming. And that's why weight loss by Hims really stands out. Hims now offers access to an affordable range of FDA-approved GLP-1 medications, including the Wegovy pill at its lowest price ever, and the Wegovy pen. With Wegovy at Hims, lose up to 20% or more of your body weight when combined with diet and exercise. It helps you regulate your appetite and eat less, so success is within reach. Plus, Wegovy is the first ever and only GLP-1 available in a pill for weight loss, so there are no needles needed. And the process is extremely convenient. Everything happens online. You connect with a licensed provider who determines if treatment is right for you, and if prescribed, your medication gets delivered right to your door. No insurance necessary. Ready to reach your goals? Visit hims.com/Campea to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's HIMS.com/Campea. hims.com/Campea. Based on advertised cash price for 30-day supply of medication only. Membership required, fee not included, and billed separately. Weight loss by Hims is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk A.S. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy clinical study information, and restrictions, visit hims.com.